I'm Dr. G, and for the past 10 years of my life, I've been passionate about all things holistic healing. I've been committed to healing myself and others from the inside out by incorporating some of the most effective modalities for healing the mental, the emotional, and the physical. I've learned that they give us the opportunity to be our most authentic and powerful selves. Heal Thyself is a show dedicated to just that. Today's show is going to be incredible, and I say it every week, of course I do, because it is incredible. Knowledge bombs of digestible information to empower and create clarity on what the highest version of us looks like. Product reviews to provide informed consent so you can buy the safest and best products out there. Better than the first two that I spoke about, and you're getting other B vitamins, which are energizing, right? Get off of it, throw it away. And special guest segments with some of the brightest and most elite minds in their field.
So what is that like on my nervous system? 6 hours of holding that emotion.
Here's the earth. Here's the mechanisms and mechanics of an earth when it breathes. We would think much different about that asthma patient that shows up.
All to create change in all the parts that make you, you, so we can start healing ourselves and each other. Hey, all right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heal Thyself. As always, taking the time out of your day. I'm grateful and really happy to have you here. So, what's going on today's show? A lot of people have asking for me to do the protein powder review. So, it was supposed to be recorded a month ago, but I had a bunch of shows that I wanted to put out there because I was just really feeling inspired. But guess what? I'm feeling inspired right now. The protein or snack bar, we'll call it snack bar, show is here. The top snack bars, and I know a lot of you are on the road or bring these as a snack during your workday, but we really want to make sure we have a really good quality snack bar every single day. So I want to just bring to you some really good quality ones that we found in our research. We went over a bunch, and I'll go through each of the categories, finding out which one is ultimately the best one out there. And today's special guest is going to be Austin Perlmutter. He's a medical doctor who is really passionate about brain health and gut health and overall mental health. And Austin, really young gun out there, he's so well-spoken, and he's like a library when it comes to all of the newest research that has to do with mental health. So he's going to talk to us about his favorite interventions, the most powerful scientific interventions out there for better mental health. And this show is really not just for you, it's for everyone, because everyone at some point suffer with a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression, just feeling off, or it goes on a huge spectrum. There's a lot of people out there who are suffering. So this show is really, really important for us all. And I really love Austin as a person, so he'll really be showing up with some good stuff today. All right, so before we get into our show, a little word from our sponsors. All right, before we drop into the knowledge bomb, I'm always excited to talk about Ned. Ned is my choice for CBD, #1 company out there. It's the highest quality CBD out there, the best hemp company around, fully transparent from the first day, from the first moment I saw them, shares all their third-party reports, who farms their products, where the extraction is coming from, what it looks like. They've been fully transparent from the first moment. They share all of their third-party testing on the website, even who farms their products, what their extraction process looks like. It's all right there on the website for you as a consumer to look at. So I want to share a little bit about their brand new product, which has been in development. They've been doing this for over a year. It's called the De-Stress Blend. This is a 1-to-1 formula. You have CBD and CBG, made from the world's purest full-spectrum hemp, and features a botanical infusion of ashwagandha. You ever hear that one? Ashwagandha is one of my favorite herbs out there for the nervous system, for cortisol, for reducing cortisol. It also has cardamom and cinnamon. So I mentioned CBG before. You may have heard of CBD, but CBG is actually known as the mother of all cannabinoids because of how effective it is at combating things like anxiety and stress. And it actually inhibits the reuptake of a neurotransmitter called GABA. This is very, very important for stress regulation and balancing. So by inhibiting the reuptake, you feel less stress, especially in those situations that are eliciting all that stress. So CBG is working with your body to keep it in a calm, relaxed state. The ashwagandha, as I mentioned before, it's one of my favorite Ayurvedic adaptogens. It's basically enhancing your body's resiliency to stress. And lastly, the cardamom and cinnamon not only adds to the delicious taste, but the cinnamon is actually a powerful prebiotic. It helps support your gut health, right? And we know that gut health is a major key player when it comes to your resiliency to stress and mental health. Cardamom also combats the stress by reducing your blood pressure levels and cortisol levels. So it's a really, really cool formula. I understand why it took a year. They really wanted to perfect it, but I want you to check it out. It's called the De-Stress Blend from Ned, and it's a brand that I love and trust. We've been working them for quite a while because they are just that, transparent, trustworthy, and really putting out good products. So the special offer from Heal Thyself is for every order over $40, you qualify for 15% off and a free De-Stress Blend sample. So go to www.helloned.com/DRG and enter the code DRG at checkout, and you're going to take advantage of this full offer, right? It's HELLONED.com/DRG. You're going to get 15% off plus a free De-Stress Blend sample off of any order over $40. All right, before the Knowledge Bomb, BioOptimizers is out with the Black Friday deal. It's starting now. Not only are you going to get a huge discount all month long, they're also giving away over $200 worth in free gifts. BioOptimizers has been advertising on my show for quite a while now, and this is a really special deal. That's why I want to talk about it. It's actually the biggest deal they've been offering since they've been on the show. And you may have heard the name of this company over and over on my show. It's because they have an awesome magnesium. It's a magnesium breakthrough. It's the one that I have actually in my pantry downstairs, right? So I'll take a little bit during the day, and I have it upstairs in my upstairs bathroom, and I will use it before bed. It has been one of the most important supplements that I've been using for my bedtime ritual. I only take a few, and this is one of them. And it's been helping at keeping me asleep, right? Getting to sleep has always been easy, but keeping me asleep is really important. And I found that I'm a much deeper sleeper. I've always been a very light sleeper. So the important part of this is the Magnesium Breakthrough is a full spectrum magnesium supplement. It has 7 unique forms of magnesium for stress relief and better sleep, all in one bottle. So magnesium is super, super, super important. We know that it's part of almost every reaction in the body, from brain to muscle health, to stress resiliency, to sleep. Magnesium is so important. The problem is a lot of these magnesium supplements out there are coming from synthetically derived ingredients, and they're not full spectrum. And sometimes you'll get a form of magnesium that ain't gonna do anything for what you want it for, right? So this actually has all 7 critical forms of magnesium for every single function, like I mentioned before, the brain, to sleep, to pain, to inflammation, to stress, everything. So all month you're gonna get 10% off using my unique code, plus over $200 in free gifts with select purchases. BioOptimizer supplements, we know, are one of the top. Man, I love that magnesium. It's amazing stuff. I want you all to try it, especially if you're having sleep issues, or especially if you feel inflamed, or especially if your muscle's hurting or you're in pain. Try that full spectrum magnesium for sure. All right, so the deal is you're going to get this through my exclusive link, special for my Heal Thyself family. So you won't find it on Amazon. You won't even get it on the BioOptimizers website. So check this out. You're going to go to www.magbreakthrough.com/DRG. And when you check out, the code is DRG10. You're going to get your discount and free gifts today. All right, Knowledge Bomb segment. Really quick, I just want to talk a little bit about these snack bars. A lot of snack bars are out there. It's a massive, massive industry. And you know it because you go to Whole Foods and you look and it's a whole wall and just layer of just snack bars and all different colors and all different words and ingredients and certifications. And to me, sometimes I'm like, oh, where do I even start, right? And before I knew about how to guide myself through these aisles or through this wall of snack bars, it was just a little bit overwhelming. So my hope is that I can bring to you some good knowledge where you can approach it with your own discernment about which one to get. But really quick, before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between organic and non-GMO. I've done it on other shows, but really just to refresh you, right? There's a difference between the labels between organic and non-GMO, and I say it because a lot of these bars utilize a non-GMO label, but not the organic. Now, it's really important to know. The non-GMO label means, and the organic label means that they both prohibit GMO in the farming and the processing of the product, right? And genetically modified foods from being corn, sugar, soy, some fish. There's different, and you can even Google it right now, GMO foods, and go to the images, and you'll see which ones are the most popular ones out there, canola. And those foods really need to be organic, more than any. But there are other foods that should be, or really need to be organic as well. I sort of think about it as a tier, and we'll learn a little bit more about it on the product review. But GMO foods are really controversial. You know that because, or we may know that, or maybe you don't know that, but they utilize a super toxic pesticide called glyphosate, and we know that this affects the gut bacteria. They're connected to multiple cancers. We know this was admitted by the scientists in-house from Monsanto Bayer. This was admitted by the executives in-house at Monsanto Bayer in legal documents. So it's no surprise, like it's coming out, and I always am kind of weary of people who just take a complete pro-GMO stance without being like, well, maybe, just maybe. That was really implicating a few years ago in 2018 when they were, or 2019 when those legal papers went out. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to the Monsanto paper show that I did if you want to learn more. But it's not a secret anymore. These are super toxic, and it's just a matter of how long it takes the scientific community to look deeper than the research and to see what's going on and who's funding that research, and if one of those papers are the ones that were funded by Monsanto, or all the controversy that came behind it. So USDA, organic, and non-GMO are trustworthy when it comes to, like I mentioned, prohibiting GMO farming and processing. The problem is the non-GMO label ends there. What USDA organic does that non-GMO doesn't is that they test for GMO residues during multiple levels of production, right? Unlike non-GMO, USDA organic also prohibits the use of chemicals and synthetic fertilizers, which is probably the biggest flaw in the non-GMO verification movement. In addition, the USDA organic prohibits antibiotics and synthetic hormones in any of the animal products, as well as things like artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives. It's a massive difference. So the whole point is, if you see a non-GMO label, non-GMO project verified, it doesn't mean that much. If you see a USDA organic label next to it, it means a lot more, right? Because it cannot be non-GMO verified and not USDA organic, but it can be USDA organic, and that already covers non-GMO verified. So it's really important. That label is the umbrella for everything else. So you want that USDA organic, all right? Other things that are really important when you look for a bar are the sugar levels, the protein level, and the fiber level, right? And those levels are super important because the way that those levels are super important because they determine a lot of how our body's going to respond to the product, right? The sugar's really, really high, protein and fiber are really, really low, your blood sugar is going to spike up, right? Your insulin's going to go up. And if you do this over time, it's going to cause some issues and inflammation in your body. So it's really important for us to understand how to shop for a protein bar. The goal is that I'm going to name some of my favorite ones, but then maybe a new one comes out that I didn't cover. But at least you'll have the criteria to find out which one is the best of the best for you. So before we get to the product review, I haven't eaten many of these snack bars. So taste is not integrated in any of these results. With that said, it's up to you. Taste varies anyway. I will mention the ones that I have tasted before, but as a whole, yeah, these snack bars are up to you to taste, especially. So I'm going to name some of the best ones, and I want you to try them all out if you enjoy them. But remember, I would never eat a snack bar over a whole food plate of food in front of me, a meal. So it should never be a replacement for a meal. If you're eating snack bar for lunch instead of lunch, right, with greens and all the colors of the rainbow, plants, or plant-based foods, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Let's get to this product review, and I really want to dive into these snack bars. All right, 2021 snack bar review. Let's just jump right into it. All right. So for starters, the perfect bar, and I'll mention this, majority are not animal-based because most of the bars out there are not animal-based, unless you go to GNC and they're going to have a ton of whey and whatever it is people use for bodybuilding and whatnot. But most of these snack bars, and rightfully so, animal products and snack bars are weird no. Animal products and snack bars, I don't think that they should be there. I don't think you should be having milk bars every single day or really poor quality whey, and like many of these have. So let's just jump right in. Perfect bar. Way too much sugar, 17, 18 grams on average. Fiber is way too low. Protein is fair at 11 to 13 grams. The ingredients seem okay, but I'm still wondering why it's even necessary to use milk, even if it's organic. It's not a perfect bar. It's far from perfect. Until they remove the milk, I don't think it should be in there. It can be a much better bar if they remove that milk powder and added it some more fiber. RX Bar, man, I've been talking about them for so long. They are the kings of greenwashing. One of the first, back in 2016. It looks like a good bar, right? And if you transition from the standard American diet, yeah, sure, it is a great bar. But if you're eating daily or you're giving it to your kids, then it's a problem, right? Nothing in there is organic. It's got 15 to 17 grams of sugar, which is a problem. It's too much sugar as it is. 12 grams or so protein, okay, but 4 grams of fiber is too low, especially with that much sugar. And then they claim to use all the clean ingredients. You see it in the front, but they don't claim the natural flavors on the front. It's in the back and you'll see natural flavors, right? And then we'll see RX bar has nothing about USDA organic. So now you can put 2 and 2 together. It has all those natural flavors, right? The potential for the umbrella term up to 80, 90, 100, 200 different ingredients, right? So now you have this bar in the front that looks super simple with clean ingredients, not knowing that there could be 100 other ingredients of crap in there. So RX bar, prescription bar, my prescription is to throw that away. Nature Valley, as I mentioned, I'm not doing a lot of animal-based snack bars, but I needed to call this one out. It's one of the worst. The sugar is low. Okay, the protein is fair, but this bar is not organic, but the ingredients were some of the most needed ingredients to be organic. It was crap. It's got vegetable oils, canola oil, inflammatory palm oil, soy, corn, natural flavor, dextrose, sugar. It's a terrible bar. Stay away from the Nature Valley one. And I'll say the same thing about Alani Nu. It's a terrible snack bar. Yeah, the sugar's low. Protein's good, but my lord, the ingredients are terrible. Processed, inflammatory, heavy corn-based ingredients, artificial sweeteners that can trick your body to eating more calories later. Natural flavors, right? Non-organic, the umbrella term for all this crap. One bar literally has glucose syrup, sugar syrup as an ingredient, spiking up the insulin, spiking up your blood sugar. Stay away from this bar. It's a crap bar. It's a crap company. Alani Nu Fit Snacks should only fit in one spot, and that's the bottom of your garbage can. Another terrible bar is a Cliff Bar. Yeah, good protein, way too much sugar, way too little fiber, not organic. The ingredients are super processed, inflammatory. Don't waste your time, money, or digestive energy on them. Go to a Cliff and drop them off. All right, Lauer Bar. I'm sorry, a lot of you love them. Right? They have whole ingredients, look good on the surface, way too much sugar. It's a sugar bar with a little bit of fiber. Doesn't have anything about USDA organic. I think some of them are non-GMO. It still doesn't mean much to me. So I would pass on Lauer Bar for some of the better picks later in this show. Rise Bar is meh. It's not organic. It's got the non-GMO label. Simple ingredients, yes. But the cashew and pea protein needs to be organic. 12 grams of sugar, a little bit too much. 15 grams of protein is good, but 1 gram of fiber, way too low. So I mentioned I'm not doing a lot of animal-based ones, but I wanted to mention Bulletproof really quick. A lot of people inquired and submitted when I asked about protein bars to do. Look, the sugar is low. The protein is fair. The fiber is pretty good. I just wish they had better quality ingredients. For being so popular, they should be doing a lot better. The nuts need to be organic. Cocoa needs to be organic. Erythritol, a lot of people have digestive issues, so they wouldn't do very well on them. And the natural flavors, if they're going to have them in there, it has to be organic. So Bulletproof is really missing the boat on this. All right, no cow is interesting. No cow you'll see at most airports even, and I think 7-Elevens. I love that they're not using any dairy, but it doesn't have any other labels. And if you look at the nutrition facts, it's got over 20 grams of protein, which is great, and 15 grams of fiber, which is awesome. But the ingredients are crappy, right? No quality certification labels. Pea protein should be organic. It's in there. It's got corn fiber. Glycerin, which usually comes from corn, can be genetically modified. Almonds need to be organic. It's got palm oil in there. It's sustainable, I believe, which always palm oil should be sustainable. You should research what it does to orangutans in the forest, but palm oil is super inflammatory as it is. It's got erythritol. A lot of people have digestive issues. I can't consume erythritol, and it's got natural flavors. So, I mean, if you're on the go and you need to eat something, say for example at the airport, then go ahead, but it shouldn't be part of your diet. Bobo Oat Bar, really quick, needs less sugar, more fiber, protein is fair. I love that they use organic oats. Right? Anytime you have oats in something, especially like a snack bar, it should be organic always. It's very important to get that. But they use vegetable glycerin, pea protein, and rice flour in many of their bars, and that needs to be organic. So keep an eye out for that, guy. Vega, like the protein powder, is trash. It's got the non-GMO label. It means nothing to me. It's got natural flavors, vegetable glycerin, inflammatory palm oil, sunflower oil can be inflammatory for many people. I prefer to not have it in my stuff. Too much sugar, too little fiber. The same goes for the Trek bar, very similar. One bar, when it comes to the plant-based one, it's a better option, but not too much. It has a non-GMO label, okay, but it has non-organic pea, rice, and almond protein, needs to be organic. Always look for those ingredients organic. corn fiber. A lot of people have sensitivities to corn, but if there is corn, it needs to be organic. It needs an organic label. Palm oil can be, as I mentioned, inflammatory. Look back on the sustainability aspect of it. We owe it to have a bigger, expansive view rather than ourselves of the world. And we should always look, if anything has palm oil, it should be sustainable. I'm really big on that. It has maltol, which are these sugar alcohols, can cause a lot of digestive issues like bloating when you have them. And then on top of that, it has natural flavors. So on the upside, it has a lot of protein in it, which is great, but Bright Bar is another bar that's very similar to it. Now, Zing is interesting. I used to eat this one a long time ago, and it was one of my favorites because I honestly thought they tasted pretty good, but it's just like the Bright Bar. It has a non-GMO label. It doesn't mean much. Again, nuts, pea, rice protein, they should always be organic. Natural flavors, stay away unless organic, and brown rice syrup can actually spike up your insulin. Many people are sensitive to it, especially when it comes to metabolically, so I would stay away from that one. Thunderbird Bar back in 2018 was a bar that, I'll tell you, I dated this girl and she was like an affiliate for Thunderbird Bar. So she had tons, she had every flavor. And for some reason, she told me that it was organic. I don't know why I didn't check. I just trusted. So I would just be at her house and I just munch on these every weekend. And the flavors were great. And actually, they're tasty bars. And then I started getting a stomach ache after like the third week of doing this, and I didn't know what it was, and I kept eating these bars. It got worse and worse, and I was like, is it these bars? And I look at them like, I thought it was whole ingredients. I thought they were all organic. None of them are organic. None of the ingredients are organic. And it's got fruits and nuts, and they always need to be organic fruits and nuts, especially when they're concentrated into a bar. So until they do, I would stay away from Thunder Bar. Nugo. I don't know if you guys know these. Man, I was so obsessed with this like chocolate pretzel flavor they had. Back in 2015, I would go to the supermarket up the street and always get these Nugo bars. The sugar's too high. The protein's pretty good. The fiber's low. Needs to be organic. We're getting the idea now. Raw Mantique, nut-free. I really haven't heard about this one, but some people wanted me to talk about this. It doesn't have an organic label, but it has organic ingredients, which are pretty good, so shout out to them. It's low sugar. Protein is 7 to 10 grams, and the fiber is so-so. It can go up to 10 grams, so that's good. When it comes to flavors, the matcha flavor has the best profile nutritionally. So Scout is so-so, really clean ingredients. I love that. They have too much sugar. 16, 18 grams is too much. And with that, you need more fiber, and they have under 10 grams of fiber. So I like the idea. I like where they're going with the bar, Scout Bar. They need to just add in more fiber-rich foods to balance it out. Go Raw Sprouted Love. They use basically whole ingredients, but it's too much sugar. Anytime you're eating a bar and it's like 15 to 20 grams of sugar, it's way too much. Even like 13. I try to keep it under 10. Too little protein, too little fiber. BHU. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but this is actually one that I've had a few times recently. I can vouch for the taste. It's pretty good. It's okay. The sugar's low at 1 gram, which is great. I love that. And the fiber's high, 16 grams. The protein if you're looking for a protein bar, it's really not the one. It can go up to 12 grams, which is good. But I eat it more for the fiber. And I like them because they're USDA organic. I don't like that they use palm oil, which is more of an inflammatory oil. I would like for them to be using it less or not even using it at all. Urban Remedy is an interesting one. It's a pretty good flavor, mostly organic ingredients. They keep the sugar under 10 grams and the protein about 10. I wish the fiber was a little bit higher. I know a few people who love them. So it's a pretty good one, actually. Again, I just wish that the fiber was a little bit higher, but Urban Remedy is one. I haven't tried it, but I'm interested in trying out. Papa Steve's is an interesting one. You'll find it in this brown, maybe recycled paper. We have them over here at the health food store, but it's interesting. It's good, but it can be better. Gluten-free is always a plus, which it is. And it's non-GMO. They have mostly organic ingredients. The downside is that some of the nuts or seeds that they use are not organic. So it's definitely big. I'm a big proponent. If you guys are out there and finding a bar, look for it to be, especially if it has nuts and seeds, and especially if it has fruits, for the organic label, okay? And the same if it has pea protein. A lot of these vegan or plant-based snack bars are using pea protein as a main form, and pea protein has to be organic, all right? So check that out, all right? So on average, the sugar is fairly low with good amount of protein, and fiber is fantastic, 10 to 15 grams. So it's good. It's a good trade-off. But Papa Steve still isn't in the best. It's not in the best tier. Live Bar, I like that it's USDA organic. I love that they use whole foods. They could do better with the protein. I'd love to see them add some more protein-rich foods and up the fiber. And if they did, Live Bar would be one of the top ones. Until now, it's pretty good. All right, so last time, Go Macro was in the top 3. It's a good one. It still could be better. I still have the same complaints that I did. Literally, my first ever show was on protein bars, and I spoke about Go Macro. 2.5 years ago? Time flies, man. That's crazy. Okay, so I do have a problem with the amount of sugar in Go Macro bars. Even 13 grams, even 11 grams, a little bit much, but if you taste it, it's really sweet. And the fiber's too low. It's still 2 to 3 grams. If you're having 13 grams of sugar in a bar, you need at least 8-9 grams of fiber to really balance it out. And listen, I'm not a food scientist. I don't know how to put flavors together. It might ruin the whole bar. But what I do know from a macronutrient and micronutrient perspective is that we need to do a little bit better with these. They're really tasty. Their new flavors that they came out with are fantastic. But the downside is also they use brown rice protein and brown rice syrup in the bars, which are a little bit of a concern for me. I don't know if I got a clear answer when I asked about the arsenic level. I have to revisit that. But arsenic in brown rice is an issue. And I've done a show about this, that if you're having rice, not only brown rice, rice at all, you can be exposed to arsenic. So especially if you're eating these every single day, I would be aware of this. So the upside, they have all of the certifications across the board. They're one of the cleanest bars out there. Protein is pretty good on average, about 12 grams per bar. It could be better. But I mentioned again, the arsenic thing is a concern because remember, USDA Organic does not mean anything about arsenic. But they really go above and beyond. I think it's a really good company. I think they can lower the sugar or keep it the same if they want, but they need to up the fiber and up the protein. All right, so the 3 best that I found are these. Remember, Go Macro, as long as they made Go Macro and Live Bar, if they made these adjustments, they would be in the top 5. All right, so Aloha Bar is new to me. It's like Go Macro, but better. It has better sugar and protein to fiber numbers. Here I have the document right in front of me. Chocolate chip cookie dough, vanilla almond crunch, caramel sea salt. They are USDA organic. They have lower amount of sugar than the Go Macro bar at 3 to 5 grams. And the protein is about 14 grams. And the fiber is really good. And that's the part. They have about 3 times more the fiber than Go Macro, which is why I bumped Go Macro from the top snack bars. But very intriguing ingredients. They use whole ingredients for the most part. I think they could do better on some of them, like the vegetable glycerin. I'm unsure why that's there, or the sunflower, which some people are sensitive to. But when it comes to the bars, I think this is one of the better ones for sure. So Aloha, and this one would take place as tied for number 2, is a Garden of Life organic plant-based performance protein bar. If you remember on my first show ever, and here I have it in front of me, if you remember on my first show ever, this was one of the top bars at the time, and this was like 2019. It's USDA Organic Non-GMO, and what I appreciate about it is that when you look at the sugar, it's 6 grams of sugar, it's low, but then the protein goes up to 20 grams of protein. So if you're super active, this might be a really good replacement for the one you're eating, particularly because, as I mentioned, it's USDA Organic, but also has a good amount of fiber. It has 9 grams of fiber. So the protein, the fiber, and the sugar, when you look at it as a whole, is really good. Up to this point, no snack bar was perfect. When it comes to the ingredients, there are some ingredients that people can be sensitive to. They have palm oil, as I mentioned, could be an inflammatory oil, so I don't think that should be in here. They also have erythritol, although even if it's organic, a lot of people are sensitive to it, which is actually, unfortunately, the reason why I can't have this bar is because I always bloat, and it's because of the erythritol. They have natural flavors, but again, it's organic natural flavors. So Aloha Bar, Garden of Life Performance Bar, the plant-based performance bar, they're not perfect, but they're pretty good ones, especially if you're really into having bars. But the best of the best is going to be this one. All right, for the best snack bar that's out there, near perfect, really good one, is the Dr. Smooth one. And you may have heard me talk about Dr. Smooth. They have their cafe in Miami and New York, and they're moving one out here to LA. But they also have an amazing line of products online, not only snack bars, but just other stuff. And I'm looking to work with them more because I believe in them. But Dr. Smooth, I was really impressed with the bar when I saw the nutrients, the macronutrients. 2 grams of sugar, 12 grams of protein, 14 grams of fiber. That's one of the best ratios that I've seen for any bar ever. And the bar is good. The flavor is good. They did a good job with it. Now, What you will see is Dr. Smoot does not have a USDA organic label yet. So I spoke with the team. We talked about all of the sourcing of the ingredients, and that is down the pipeline. This is a brand new bar. But yeah, they do use organic almond butter for sure. And they use ingredients like almonds, pea protein, inulin, but these are all sourced organically. At this point, you won't see it, but the ingredients in here are organic and sourced organically, really, really, like beyond organic. This company is like so particular on their products. So yeah, I have a bunch at my house, and this is the one that I'll eat when I'm on the go. So there you go. Tied for number 2, the Aloha and the Garden of Life bar. Not perfect, but pretty impressive bars compared to the rest of the field. And the best being out there, Dr. Smoot. All right, everyone, super special guest. He's calling in from Oregon, and of the first time I heard this guy talk was on a Clubhouse, and I'm like, I need to get him on the show ASAP. So Dr. Austin Perlmutter is an internal medicine physician. He's a writer, he's a researcher, and he is someone who is really stepping into connecting the mind and the body with all of the knowledge and information that he has to give us this information really to understand what's going on and how we can better our overall health. And Austin, man, I am such a fan of your work. I think that I know that you are super knowledgeable in what you're doing. And there's so much that I want to talk to you about, and we talked about it off air, what we're going to cover, and we're going to cover it all. But first and foremost, welcome to the show. I want to know, how did you start getting into this whole mental mind-body connection of health?
Christian, thank you so much for having me. And I agree, this is one of these podcasts that I've been really excited to do because like you, I feel like, this is the conversation, this is the space that I really care about. And I feel like you've done an amazing job of having these types of conversations in a more public forum. So I'm just excited to be able to engage with you in this medium. And, things are overall weird in the world, but we're connecting, having these conversations. To your question about the mental health space, it was very much a process. I went into medicine not because I was one of these people who knew from a young age I wanted to be a doctor, had a stethoscope around my neck. But I went in because I like helping people, I like science, and I like communicating ideas. I like synthesizing ideas. And the truth is, for a lot of my medical training, actually very similar to many people, my mental health was not good. Anxious symptoms, depressive symptoms. I remember coming home from work and just sitting on the couch because I couldn't think of what else to do that would allow me to feel better. I'd watch TV, eat some junk food, do anything I could to try to get my mental state a little bit better. And there was such a fundamental disconnect with the idea that I was learning about health and yet wasn't able to experience that for myself. And it's something I saw in my patients too, So I did internal medicine, which meant that people would come in with things like high blood pressure and heart disease and diabetes. And I would say, we can target that system. Let's bring your blood sugar down. Let's bring your blood pressure down. Let's give you some medication to improve your heart function. And while it was helpful, and while people, did get improvement, I didn't necessarily see that they cared about these things the way that I did. And what I realized through this time is that the things that matter to people are the things that directly relate to their mental health. And that I was chasing surrogates in medicine. I was chasing blood pressure, cholesterol, and that what mattered to other people and what mattered to me was looking at the stuff that makes life meaningful, looking at the things that make mental health actionable and making mental health sustainable over the lifespan. So, I had my own discoveries in this space, and we can talk about that a bit. But when I had time to reflect on all of this and was able to incorporate this into the questions of what are we actually doing in the way that we approach something like depression, I realized that we tend to look at depression through an incredibly superficial lens. We look at it through a construct that has a lot to do with character and some psychological terms, but we don't ask about what's happening within the brain and the body that is driving that condition. And that leads to a lot of blame. It leads to blaming people for the way that they feel. It leads to a lot of this unnecessary feeling of putting other people under the bus because they can't get themselves to feel better. And I have realized in the last several years, doing my own research, publishing on this subject, and educating people on this subject, that the biology is profound. So there was a unification there of something that I had wanted kind of my whole medical career, which was to be able to provide preventive care, preventive education. But no longer was that just unique to preventing blood pressure issues, heart disease. It was now specific to something that I really cared about, which is asking how depression exists within the body at a biological sense, and then being able to go upstream from that and provide some of the lifestyle modification and advice that might help people to both prevent and ideally also treat some of what is manifested as depression.
I feel that so much because it seems to me that you had so much awareness even before this, right? The intent was to heal, right? But just as you said, in your words, you were chasing surrogates. And that's unfortunately the whole community of how we treat people is we chase these surrogates. But man, kudos on the awareness of having the feeling to step into something that is really, really at the root of so much. And when it comes to mental health, it's incredible. So many of us suffer with a spectrum of depression or anxiety, some sort of overwhelm that we're feeling in our body. And to me, a lot of the world is manifesting the way it is because a lot of us are carrying these states, right? These emotional states, these biological states. And you're right. We look outside of us so many times, right, for a quick fix and also throwing people under the bus because we don't know what's happening in our biology. So naturally, then I want to ask, what the heck is happening in our biology? Why are so many people, and I know it's a complex question, but in your work, in your research, in patients, what's happening to so many of us that we're in these states?
Right. So let me start with, I think, an important point. When you think about a person having a disease by definition requires a diagnosis. So you could say, based on a person's hemoglobin A1C, that they have diabetes if it's at one level, and if it's below that level, they no longer have diabetes. You could say the same thing about high blood pressure, hypertension. You say they met that criteria, that blood pressure, their systolic blood pressure was high enough. So now you've had a diagnosis of hypertension. And why that's important is because we use these diagnostic codes to guide our treatment, as well as, of course, insurance reimbursement. So it might be appropriate to give one person metformin and insulin because they have a diagnosis of diabetes. But before that, maybe not so clear. As it relates to depression and anxiety, it's the same kind of scenario, right? So many times a person will come in, they'd be having a crummy time, but you would basically go through the diagnostic criteria for depression. And so maybe they almost met it, but they didn't quite meet it. They'd say that person doesn't have major depression, right? They don't meet the diagnostic criteria. So depending on the estimate you look at, there may be somewhere around 300 million people around the world who are suffering from major depression. But the thing that I believe after all of this work that I've been doing is that the continuum is real and that most people don't have good mental health. And I think, Christian, getting to the point you brought up, which is so much of what's happening in the world is a result of that. I totally agree. It isn't just the people who are suffering from severe depression that we need to pay attention to. It's the average person who is dealing with these things and who is having a bad time. Understanding where and when that is preventable and what we can do to offset that is so key. So to the question of what is the biology of this, I want to be clear up front. It isn't completely understood that this is the exact way that depression forms within the body. But I'll go through a couple of, I think, important points in kind of the understanding over the last, let's say, 100 years as to what is driving depression. Or maybe I'll start a little bit earlier. So some people will remember this town called Babylon. It was located in ancient Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. People back then felt depressed symptoms. They didn't obviously have a DSM or a diagnostic code for depression, but they still felt down. And this is what we can tell from some of their texts. When a person was having a low mood then, they said it was due to an issue with the gods. They had kind of angered their personal gods. It was something the gods were doing to kind of punish them. And then if you fast forward a couple thousand years to ancient Greece, they had a better understanding that there was a connection between biology and our cognitive mental state. And so they felt at that point that melancholia, which was again, an early version of describing what we might now call depressive symptoms, was connected to a buildup of black bile in the spleen, right? So they had made the connection that biology was involved with depression. These days, we don't necessarily think it's the black bile, at least not in part, not in complete. So the important point here, though, is they started to make this connection with biology and depression. And in the last 100 years, that's where we've really started to see some of these real pathways being brought to the surface. And the one that maybe most people are familiar with is the connection between molecules like serotonin and depression. So you think of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are SSRIs, kind of the most commonly prescribed antidepressants. The way that they're thought to work is that they work on the serotonin system and they increase levels of serotonin in the brain. Serotonin levels in the brain are maybe low in depression, so it brings them up. People feel better. And that is still the prevailing hypothesis as far as the most popular description as to what might be happening in our biology and depression. The problem with this is that when you give people antidepressant medications like SSRIs, if it was just the serotonin issue, serotonin rises pretty quickly, right? Minutes to hours, but it takes weeks before people get significant benefit from these medications. So the other thing is, not everyone gets a benefit from SSRI. So it can't be as simple as just the serotonin piece. So it's really only been kind of in the last couple of decades that some of these other hypotheses had come to the surface as far as helping to explain what's happening in the biology of depression. There are many of them. One that your listeners, I'm sure, are quite familiar with is the stress system and how stress and depression come together. So we know that people who experience adverse childhood events early in life are more likely to experience subsequent depression. We know that people who undergo periods of having significant acute stressors are 2.5 times more likely to then develop depression. So there's a lot of connection there between stress and depression. But the places that I'm spending the majority of my time researching, because I think they're among the most exciting ways of reframing the biology of depression, are two systems within the brain. One is the brain's immune system. We can talk about that specifically as it relates to inflammation. This is a powerful tether here, right? Because inflammation is driven by things like our diet. And if diet drives inflammation and inflammation drives depression, we start to see why people who eat a crummy diet are at higher risk for depression. We start to see why people who eat healthy food tend to have lower risk for depression. And then the last one I'll bring up here is neuroplasticity. Again, it's a topic people may have heard about before. It's the idea that the brain rewires itself as a response to what is happening around it. So this is always happening. Your brain is always changing in response to the environment. But it's thought that in depression, there may be issues with this rewiring process. And so many medications today that work for depression are thought to, in part, have their effect by acting on neuroplastic mechanisms. And that ranges from SSRIs to even things like ECT, which is convulsive therapy, to things like psychedelics, ketamine. So that's actually one of the dominant hypotheses as to how ketamine works on depression. It activates neuroplasticity. So again, lots of kind of details there for people to dive into if they're interested. But the bottom line is we now have a lot more of an understanding of what might be happening in the brain as it relates to depression. And I think at a very fundamental, basic level, what that means is we no longer have to just blame people or blame ourselves for feeling down. We say, there's biology involved. There are changes within our body that we can understand and that we can destigmatize because this is a reflection of your character flaw. It's now a reflection of biology that we can influence.
Mm-hmm. And how empowering is that? That we can influence that mechanism of inflammation that happens in the brain. Do you see psychology, medicine, psychiatry, everything as a whole moving to that paradigm where we go, okay, maybe it's not just specifically the neurotransmitters. Maybe now we're stepping into a paradigm that's new, that is more expansive, and also that we have a lot more intervention control over. Do you see that moving that way, or are we very far away, just to get a gauge?
Right. So I would just be clear, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. I do speak with a lot of people in this space. I do lecture to psychiatrists. Mm-hmm. There is a general theme in medicine towards precision and personalization that is definitely happening. And It does seem like in part that's happening more in the kind of entrepreneurial startup med tech space than it is in the clinical space. But personalization is already happening in psychiatry. If a person has a history or a family has a history of depression and certain medications have worked for that family, that gets factored in as far as what medications might be recommended for that person if they are experiencing depression. Where I see this really happening isn't so much in addressing these various systems that are involved, but more just, we have a wider range of potential therapeutics and people are interested because they seem to work. So if it's diet, if it's ketamine, if it's potentially even other psychedelic medicines, the mechanisms as to why they work, I think for the average person is not so interesting. For many clinicians, maybe isn't quite as interesting, but the efficacy data is what is going to get people involved. Where I see this going, where it hasn't gone yet, but where I see this going, is if we can start to understand the relative contribution to these different systems to the experience of depression, then we can start to target that with various lifestyle and pharmaceutical interventions. And there's early data to support this as it relates to the inflammation depression connection. So you can look at a person's levels of inflammation, which you would do by measuring from the blood, right? So you would measure levels of what are called cytokines. And Christian, stop me at any point if you want more detail or less detail on this stuff. But if you were to take a blood sample, you could look at markers called cytokines, which are immune markers of inflammation. And based on the levels of certain cytokines, you might be able to predict the efficacy of an antidepressant medication. You may also be able to predict in general whether a person is going to have resistance to conventional antidepressant medications. So where that might, in the near future play out is if you measure a person's cytokines, their levels of inflammation, and those are high, you might not recommend one drug and instead recommend another drug. Similarly, you might recommend a dietary intervention for somebody who has high levels of inflammation and depression, because we know that there is a strong correlation between what we eat and our levels of inflammation, versus if their inflammation levels were relatively normal, you might think about, is there something going on with the neuroplasticity pathway, with the stress pathway? Or is it maybe more of a monoamine, which is basically a technical term for something like serotonin? So maybe that would be better targeted with kind of a conventional therapy.
Mm-hmm. And to think that the landscape of this medicine is becoming more personalized, and now we're having hopefully everyone getting their blood markers tested, especially if they go, "Doc, I've been feeling myself in the past 6 months and it's getting worse. Let's immediately start looking at these things." My hope is that in the next few years, it starts becoming much more of a commonplace. You mentioned about food and inflammation, and we know so many of us, and you know what? I don't have to stop you. This is an incredibly smart audience that we have. They're on it. So, and just educated when it comes to medicine, especially if they're so curious to know. So they're on it. They'll research. They hear cytokines. I can already hear the keyboards clacking away. What else? Are there other things aside from food that are really dictating the inflammatory spectrum that could be affecting our brain and our mood? And for people listening or viewing, okay, they go, all right, you know what? I eat pretty healthy. I still feel really off. What are other things that we can start incorporating in our lives to better our emotional states?
This is a great question. And I love that you're asking it, because I think often we hear about experts saying, it's all about food. And if you change your diet, that fixes everything. And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes we can't just, change our diets completely. There are other reasons. You think about, you're a teenager, you're still living at home, your parents eat a crummy diet. Maybe you can't go and eat all organic, all health food all the time. So what else can we be doing to offset this inflammation? Two of the things that I think people don't think about, I'm going to bring up, and then we can talk about some of the other ones like exercise and sleep that people tend to talk about more. The two things that I would advise people to pay more attention to are the media that you're consuming and the nature you aren't getting. And we can dive into both of those in a little bit more detail, but kind of the take home from that is, I think people don't understand that the signals coming in through your eyes and ears activate the immune system in the same way that food does, that the stress we experience as a result of the news we consume or the media that we scroll through has the same effect on our immune system that eating a terrible diet might, in that it can increase inflammation by route of the stress pathways in the brain. So I think we really need to be paying attention to everything that we're consuming, not just our food, but the content that we're taking in. And then on the flip side of that, I think that something people tend to not pay attention to enough as it relates to a positive thing we can be doing for our immune systems is basically getting off of the grid a little bit and engaging with nature. There's a variety of different studies at this point that have shown that nature exposure seems to have positive effects on the immune system directly, but also seemingly through the stress mechanisms. That nature exposure appears to de-stress us. It also has a bunch of really fascinating other benefits where it helps us to make potentially better decisions. We can talk about that research if you like, but also it seems to connect us to other people. It promotes empathy. So I think, sleep, exercise, fundamental to kind of keeping our immune systems and keeping our mood in the right spot. But these other things are maybe these easy hacks that we might not be paying attention to, where we might get a huge value from just changing our little bit, the way that we are experiencing media day to day and the way that we're engaging with nature.
Austin, thank you for saying that, because we're talking about free interventions. What you just mentioned costs nothing, right? You can find time, like you said, the media that you're consuming and the nature you're not. We can find time to go, I'm just going to turn off my TV. What am I doing? This isn't truth to me, and this is making my nervous system feel like it's contracting. And my immune system is reacting in that exact way, right? It's overstimulating, causing inflammation, right? The signals that we see through our eyes, like you said. And to liken it to, I can be eating a really healthy diet and I can be really watching so much fear-based media. It's like I'm eating a really crappy diet. What is the diet for if we're consuming that? Which is crazy for so many people here because we don't make that connection. And then just being out in nature, man.
That's right. So let's just dive into that in a little bit more detail. Something that has become abundantly clear, and I think most people maybe understand this implicitly, is that the quality of our media is not good overall. I'm not saying there isn't great media out there. I'm not saying there isn't great news out there. But by and large, what we've seen is that people who produce content understand that humans have certain kind of psychological crutches or psychological ways of seeing the world. And one of those is that we pay attention to the negative. We can't turn away when people are telling us about all the terrible things happening in the world. And there's a number of reasons why that might be the case. The one that makes the most sense to me is evolutionarily, we had to pay attention to the things that might take us out of the game, that might kill us. Not so important to think about the really positive things, right? We should occupy more space in our brains. But when you are paying attention to media and that media is telling you the world is ending every single day, it's really hard to turn that off. So there's kind of, again, this negativity bias that is used by the news media in order to get us to maintain our attention on the content that they're providing. The other thing is we pay attention to sensationalized content, right? We can't turn away when things are seemingly really either terrible or even really positive, but basically we pay attention to the things that are outside of the usual, outside of the norm. And so if you are producing content, you are going to push towards the extremes in a bid to keep people's attention on what you're doing. There are a number of other things that we could talk about as it relates to social media. I mean, I think the social comparison piece is another kind of evolutionary mechanism that is really important because it was always really important for us to fit in the tribe, right? You didn't want to be cast out into the forest. These days, though, that social kind of interaction happens so quickly and happens in a way that is honestly so different from what our biology is trying to protect us from, that we can't really differentiate when it's an important signal and not. And so we're just constantly seeking social approval that ramps people up and causes them to produce images and content that isn't actually realistic. So we're comparing ourselves with things that don't actually exist in the real world. And for all of these reasons, it kind of changes, I think, the way that that our brains perceive reality. The other thing I'll just say on this is you consider what it's like to go out into nature, and then you consider what it's like to wade into social media. And I think there's a very real opportunity cost with that, where if we're spending all of our time on social media, taking in this stressful content, we are not taking in the type of content that helps to regulate our brain function, that helps to shift us more to a state of reflection versus a state of reactivity. And so all of this can then be tethered to understanding why certain people may be at risk of having worse mental health as a result of taking in too much of the wrong types of media, and why many people seem to get a mental health benefit from going out into nature for as little as 20 minutes once a week has actually been correlated with lower levels of cortisol in people's saliva. We're not talking about anything too crazy here. So I think that those are kind of the opposite poles of the spectrum here, where one is this incredibly artificial world that has been created to basically capture our attention. And the other side is the most natural world possible, where there's no incentive for nature to do anything, right? It's not trying to steal our attention. It's not trying to take our money. It's just there.
Yeah. And just there. And that is what our nervous system, our biology, our immune system knows and evolved with. And those are the signals, the very signals that I remember, Austin, I had this patient who was suffering from depression. She came to me, and man, we tested her blood, inflammatory proteins, inflammatory markers. I put her on an amazing diet. I said, here, look, these supplements have been shown that they can help, especially with your stress response. She didn't even start any of that. Do you know what she did before anything? She didn't even put her money into buying anything, even starting her diet. All she did was, and she lived near nature. She walked in nature. She just changed her habit. Instead of waking up, going on her phone, getting dressed, drinking coffee, and hurrying up and going to work, she just made time to go on a 30-minute walk every morning. She called me back a month later, and she's like, "Hey, Dr. G, I'm cured. I don't need you anymore." I said, "Okay, wow, what happened?" And she's like, I promise you, I'm gonna be eating healthy and everything, but I just noticed that I haven't been in nature for years. She's like, I can't believe that I would wear my shoes, not even take off my shoes and put my feet on the ground. I can't believe that I lived by a forest and I wouldn't go into the forest. She would just get so lost in this world of, like you said, images and stimulus that are completely not real. And then she's finally coming back to her own self and reflecting. And that allowed all the stuff that she needed to look at to come up. But regardless, that was her cure. Not everyone's, but her cure was right there in front of her. And that's the power of nature.
I love that. I love that story. I've experienced something similar. Nature was my mental health drug when I was in residency. We talked about, I live up here in Portland, Oregon. It's super gloomy for half of the year, but you get outside in the trees, you breathe in that air, you see like this life all around you, the greenery all around you. And for me, N of one here, but it was therapeutic to the extreme.
How many of us go out in nature and we go, I'm still angry like I was before I came out in nature, man. I was telling you, I went to the beach this morning. The beach is my cure, man. I can't step on the beach, go by the shoreline, put my feet in the water, come back out and be more frustrated than I was before I went, or be more sad, right? Or be carried. It's the most beautiful way of whether it's negative ions, whether it's aromatics in the air, there's something there, energetics, that really put us back in this crazy, amazing space. Now, let me just
throw in one study here because I think it's interesting. So when they took people in a natural setting in a forest and they measured with EEG their brainwaves, they found those brainwaves changed as a result of how dense the nature around them was. So, there are a number of ways to approach this. You can look at stress markers, inflammatory markers, psychological markers like mental health. But the bottom line is that nature changes our brains, right? So nature changes the way that we perceive the world around us. It changes the way that we interact with other people. It changes the way that we interact with ourselves and within ourselves. So I think that, like this lady who you described with the story, we may not understand exactly what's happening here, but these types of anecdotes are anything but uncommon. And the one thing I would say to people is, we often don't understand how we're actually spending our time in the course of a day. And I get it. Many of us have jobs that require us to be in front of a desk for 8+ hours. I can understand that. But if you were to map out the hours in the day and ask, what is the content you're consuming at each of those intervals? I think you would recognize that it tends to be this incredibly stressful and sensationalized and unhelpful content. So the fact that even a 30-minute nature walk can help offset that just speaks to the power of nature on having this positive effect on our psychology. And that's why I just recommend to basically everyone find a way to interact with nature at least once a day. It can be an indoor plant. It can, in some cases, just be, going outside, sitting under a tree. You don't have to do something with nature. I think the opposite is actually even more helpful. Just be in nature. This is the whole study of what's called Shinrin Yoku. It's a Japanese field of research. But the idea is being out into nature or out in nature, no agenda, just basically present in it, has these psychological benefits. So coming back to what we said before, I don't have a financial incentive here. I haven't invested in, nature stocks. Just try it out and you'll see how powerful it can be.
Oh man, thank you for quoting that study too. It's so empowering because all of us, especially as Americans, go, we don't have enough time. I don't really have enough time to walk today. Do you have 20 minutes? Because I sure as hell have 20 minutes to scroll on Instagram. I have 20 minutes to put up a picture and comment on stuff. We all have that 20 minutes if we just look at how we can integrate it. And it's so motivating because even if you live in the Northeast, like when I was doing my residency in Philly, I was like, oh my God, I'm between patients and I have to find a way in 30 minutes to eat my lunch, but also go on a nature walk because we had we had a beautiful pathway in this cancer hospital. And man, I came back and I can show up for my patients or even whatever it is, patients, work, whatever you're doing, you show up better. Even if it's in the middle of the day or after, you show up for your family better. However it is, it's like, nature's the answer, man. And I understand why you live in the woods. Awesome stuff. Now, you're as passionate as me when it comes to really these agents that can be so powerful for mental health, and they're on the forefront. And man, every time I open my Instagram, there's a new breakthrough study or it's a new advocate. It's in a medium that is reaching the whole world, and it's psychedelics. And one massive stigma. I remember I was talking to my dad about it, and he's like, "Oh no, be very careful," because he was in the 60s and 70s where they thought about psychedelics very differently than we do especially as practitioners, you and I. One. Are psychedelics helping mental health? Are they changing the landscape? Where are we going with them? What are some of the things you've seen in that space that have made you go, as a practitioner, whoa, this is really powerful stuff? Let's dive in, because this is probably my favorite topic in medicine.
It's a fantastic topic because I think that, when you look at things that have a possibility or a potential to provide orders of magnitude more benefit than what people are experiencing in the day-to-day right now, I think this is one of those. So let's, for listeners, talk a little bit about the history of psychedelics, what brought us to the current moment, and then we'll talk about some of the clinical research, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the things in that space that I am most interested in learning about. If you've read How to Change Your Mind, Michael Pollan's book, or heard of anything in this space, some of this will be familiar, but the bottom line is there was a period of time where psychedelic research was doing great. The 1950s or so, there were tons of studies coming out. And in this time, from the 1950s era on, they actually put out around 1,000 different publications as it related to psychedelic benefits or psychedelic research. This research had been done on thousands, tens of thousands of people, and it was really gaining a lot of traction. And then for a variety of reasons, many of these political, seemingly, it was thought that the psychedelics had an outsized potential to do harm. And that had something to do with the fact that these molecules had left the lab. People were using them in a recreational context. And it was just seen by the government for one reason or another that it was important to regulate the use of these molecules, these medicines. And so basically, they were criminalized and the research really slowed to a halt. Now, I will say, kind of getting back to the historical context as to have psychedelics been around for some time, Christian, I know you know this very well. Societies around the world had been using these molecules for thousands of years. I mean, there's carbon dating showing that these molecules, I think it was peyote, was around 5,700 years ago. And then there's evidence that these molecules had been used by humans, even thousands of years prior to that. There's evidence that they may have been used in ancient Greece as part of some of these ceremonies. So bottom line is people had been using them for a long time. They became popular in the mid 20th century as a result of a variety of things, but in part the fact that they had been synthesized by a chemist and had been made more readily available. So there was this period that went from, again, kind of the middle of the 20th century up until pretty recently that they were seen as disasters, right? They were reprogramming people's minds. They were leading to a variety of negative outcomes as it relates to brain function. And it got to the point which, for people who haven't heard about this, look up MK Ultra. It's fascinating. We don't have time to go into all of that. Mm-hmm. But the CIA was experimenting with these molecules, including LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, giving them to people with the understanding that they might lead to their ability to impose mind control on these participants. So really very poor understanding of what these chemicals actually did. Little side note here. This is one of the subplots to Stranger Things. So if you've seen that show,
I read that.
Check.
Yeah.
Really interesting. But basically, the CIA was doing research with these molecules over the course of the middle of the 20th century, even at the time where they were pretty much illegal for people to be using recreationally. And you have only in the last couple of decades a resurgence of interest in using these molecules in both primarily in a research context. And there are a number of reasons for that. But one of the most empowering pieces of all of this is that the literature to date has suggested that these molecules, psychedelic molecules, may be some of the most potent medicines we have available for mental health conditions. And so just briefly here, the areas that I believe have been best studied as it relates to the positive effect of psychedelics on mental health conditions would be for treatment-resistant major depressive disorder, and that would be for ketamine, psilocybin, and ayahuasca, for treatment-resistant PTSD, and that would be MDMA and LSD. And then there's good research for kind of end-of-life distress. And so that would be LSD and psilocybin. There's also research for obsessive-compulsive disorder, alcohol use, and smoking cessation. And again, it's still relatively early as it relates to large-scale data around these molecules. But the bottom line is the signal that we've seen so far, or at least the way that I would interpret the signal we've seen so far, is that these may be some of the most efficacious molecules possible as it relates to refractory mental health conditions. So where the science is right now, where the research is right now, it seems to be primarily in treating people who didn't get benefit from conventional therapeutics. Where I'm hoping things move is to consider these in times first-line therapeutic agents. And I see you nodding here, so I'm glad that you agree with me. It seems so strange, that we are as concerned about psychedelics as we are, given the fact that the safety profile is actually quite fantastic. And you think about SSRIs, where around 50% of people have significant side effects, sexual side effects, GI side effects. Those are not medications that are clean medications. But then you think about psychedelics and you see that the safety profile for people who are using these in the right setting, in the right context, is really fantastic. That the rates of significant side effects are very low. And so really what I hope we're moving towards is a situation where we can have an objective discussion about the therapeutic potential of these molecules, independent of all of the political kind of nonsense over the last century, and ask, how are we doing with mental health around the planet? We've already talked about this. We're doing really bad. We're doing a horrible job managing mental health. Do we have potential therapeutics with a risk-benefit ratio that seems practical? And I would say, yes, psychedelics represent that. And then it's just a question of saying, how can we implement these in a way that is most efficacious to the person who needs them? So there's a lot of progress being made. As I mentioned, I live here in Oregon. In Oregon, they have recently decriminalized many of these substances. There is a movement towards getting basically therapists certified to be able to use things like psilocybin in a clinical context. Currently, you can really only use these in clinical trial form. It's all very exciting. Where I spend the majority of my time as it relates to psychedelics is in investigating how it maps onto these pathways that I've described as it relates to things like depression. Because I think that it's really important for people to understand this isn't all just like a psychological mind type thing. Granted, that's a key piece of it. So having that profound spiritual experience does predict a higher rate of people having positive mental health outcomes. But what we're seeing is that these molecules, just like conventional drugs, activate the pathways that are involved in the brain in the context of depression. So I mentioned this earlier. Ketamine appears to work in large part by activating neuroplasticity. It has an effect on changing the way the brain wires itself in a positive way. Molecules like psilocybin, LSD, these are kind of the classical psychedelics. They work by binding to a serotonin receptor called the 2A receptor. And so we would think that is in part what that binding is related to kind of the psychological experience, the kind of trippiness of the drugs. But what we now understand too is that our immune cells have the 2A receptor, we now understand that these receptors and also other receptors, like the sigma receptor, are involved with the immune system as well. So the point of it is, this is a physical molecule that has these signaling effects on all of these biological pathways involved in mental health conditions. And if we look at it that way, we can say, look, this is a legitimate substance that acts on these pathways in a positive way for people with depression. So hopefully that can placate people who say, I need a scientific understanding for it.
Right.
But the other piece of this, and I know this is something that you've spoken about before, is that there is this disconnect between kind of like biology and the spiritual experience that so many of us need more of in order to be in a good mental state. And I think that, I'll just be honest about it. In my life, there's been nothing else that has been able to create that portal between the kind of idea of what the world is supposed to be and the reality of what it could be. And I think just seeing through that for a moment is a powerful treatment for many people, myself included, in being able to shake off so much of, I think, what leads to feelings of discontent in the modern world.
Mm-hmm. Man, thank you for even giving us those mechanisms and understanding how is it really working in the body and the level that where we can, in science, go, yeah, actually, we do know those receptors and they do have efficacy and they can change people's mental states and they can modulate the immune system. It's incredible to hear this, right? And thank you for giving us that scientific benefit. But for me, beyond that is, like you said, the spiritual aspect, understanding, whoa, this is what the world can be. Wait, this is who I can be. This is how I can show up, right? Because it all starts with you, right? You're given this sense of self and you see that which everything you are and always have been. And then you see that which is holding you back, right? And for me, it all starts with you, right? Because people feel that frequency and they have the permission to be themselves, right? And let go of that which is not them. And it's just a cascade. For me, I have a friend out here who is really big in the psychedelic space, and she says that psychedelics can save the world in many ways. And for me, it's like, whoa, if people just had the moment to put away and aside the stigma and be in a beautiful sentence setting and ceremony, and finally meet themselves for the first time in their lives, what the world would be after one night if the whole world did it. I would be hard-pressed to say the world would be the way it is. Maybe we go back to our egoic ways, maybe we do, but at least we can't unknow or unsee that which we touched on.
I love that. I mean, I think so much of it is breaking down the shell, the walls that we put up over the decades of our lives and letting us see the lack of necessity of all of that and who we are independent of all of the shell we put on as a face to the outside world. I mean, I think, it's such an important conversation, and many people are in the space of saying psychedelics can save the world and we just need everyone to use them. I think the majority of people right now aren't ready for that for a variety of reasons. They don't want to be shown. They don't want to walk that path. And I guess the piece that I'm most interested in is the question of what is it that people are so concerned about when it relates to other people using them? Because I think there are so many people out there who are of the mind that these are just bad molecules, right? And that we should here in quotes, be capable of enjoying life just as well without the use of things like that. Then, of course, no issues with drinking coffee, which we know has significant effects on the way we perceive the world. Or
alcohol.
Yeah. That's an even more extreme version, right? No issues with alcohol being legal and used by people around the world. But I guess, the question would be, what is the big pushback to it? And what problems do people have with the idea that other people are using this, not even, let's say, in the context of having a diagnosed mental health condition, but just to improve their overall quality of life? And I think there's a lot of misinformation that has been put out as far as the effects of these drugs on the brain in a negative sense. One of the things that I learned in my medical training was MDMA, for example, which is kind of based around an amphetamine molecule, has neurotoxic effects. That MDMA leads to all of these negative effects on the brain function. And, there were some studies that supported that. And then on further review, I realized there are a lot of methodological flaws with the way that information was presented. And perhaps more importantly, it's in part the fact that these drugs are illegal that makes it likely that they're going to be cut with or tainted with other molecules that can have those neurotoxic effects. And obviously, we've seen a shift in the way that America feels about marijuana, right? In that in many states now, it isn't considered illegal for a person to possess THC. But it just seems like it's a very slow progression for people to be comfortable with other people or even themselves, allowing a difference in the way that they see the world and to question in that sense. So where I start with people is nothing to do with psychedelics. It's just the fundamental question of, do you feel comfortable asking questions about the way the world is? Because if the answer to that question is no, if they're like, I want to do everything I can to preserve this very tenuous understanding of reality, I don't think that's a person for whom psychedelics are necessarily the first thing I would think of. I think you have to do a lot of work to get your brain into a place where you're receptive to that.
Sure.
And I talk with a lot of people who are working in clinical studies and who are working in ketamine clinics. And one of the concerns I have is the idea that we can just use one of these molecules, fix our mental health, and then go about our day-to-day immediately afterwards. And that's why the integration piece is so key. Integration in the general sense, we need far more of that in our day-to-day lives, but especially kind of in the aftermath of using one of these mind-altering substances.
And that's the fairest question you can ever ask, right? And it's slow. I agree. And we mentioned that the alcohol thing is so much weaved into the fabric where that's mind altering, right? But it is slow. And that is a question we should all ask ourselves. I think more people than not are going to say, no, I'm actually not content with the world the way it is. And I would like to see the world in a different place. And that's the first step. For me, and whatever my experiences were, it took me years before I was just even comfortable with myself and the world to be able to be like, I don't like the world the way it is. We need to change a lot. Anyway, look, we can have a full other podcast conversation on this, but I want to bring people to you and your work. And how do we find you? What are any projects you're working on? Where can we lead our eyes to more of Dr. Austin Perlmutter?
I really appreciate that. The easiest place to find out what I'm up to is my website, which is austinperlmutter.com. I also have social media, so you can find me if you search Austin Perlmutter on Instagram. And then finally, I do have a podcast. It's called Get the Stuck Out, and you can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Really what we've talked about is where I'm working to be. I think having the conversations about mental health and being willing to ask, what's behind this, both from a biological perspective and from kind of a psychological stuckness perspective, that for me feels like the right spot as far as me being able to hopefully help with the conversation and interact with other people like you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about these topics.
I'll say this before we sign off. Austin, you are the evolution of what a doctor should be and can
too
be
kind.
And will be. And I see the world going that way. I do. Even though traditional medical school is very slow, there's a lot of people who are moving in a space, seeing the world bigger picture and seeing health connected to the mind and the body and interactions outside of us and community and nature, all of the things which we need to have discussions and conversations about. And you are standing on your pedestal of expertise to give that to us. And I thank you for that. And what an awesome conversation. I enjoyed it so much. We touched on the topics that bring me fire. And I really hope that the viewers and listeners feel the same way. Thank you so much, Austin, for coming on the show.
Yeah. Christian, thank you for all your work and really appreciate it.
All right. And that's a wrap.